What if the most important moment of your life became the scene of your deepest, most terrifying secret being exposed? Picture this: a glittering, high society wedding at the famed Biltmore Estate. The groom, tech billionaire Maxwell Blackwood, is a titan of industry, a man who commands the world's attention. His bride, the impossibly beautiful Isabella Montgomery, is the daughter of a dynasty. As they stand at the altar, surrounded by the powerful and the elite, Maxwell turns to speak his vows, but the words catch in his throat. His eyes glaze over, he clutches his chest, and in front of everyone, he collapses. Panic erupts. But amidst the chaos, one woman in the crowd isn't screaming. His ex-girlfriend, Dr. Aris Thorne. And she's the only one who knows this isn't a heart attack. It's something far more complex, a secret he's been hiding for years, a secret that's about to unravel everything. The air in the grand ballroom of the Biltmore Estate wasn't merely air, it was a curated atmosphere, heavy with the scent of 1,000 white peonies and the silent, crackling hum of immense wealth. Sunlight filtered through the cavernous arched windows, fell in golden shafts, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny diamonds over the heads of the assembled guests. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a merger, a coronation, the public sealing of two American dynasties, Blackwood and Montgomery. At the center of it all stood Maxwell Blackwood. To the world, he was the face of Innovate, the tech behemoth that had reshaped modern communication. At 34, he possessed a sharp, restless energy that was only barely contained by his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his jaw was firm, and his eyes, usually a piercing blue that could dissect a business proposal from across a boardroom, seemed distant today. He looked every bit the king surveying his court, but a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple betrayed a tension no one else seemed to notice. His bride, Isabella Montgomery, was a masterpiece of bridal engineering. Her gown, a one-of-a-kind creation by a designer flown in from Paris, cascaded around her in waves of silk and hand-stitched pearls. Her smile was radiant, practiced, a perfect match for the flawless 10-carat diamond on her finger. She was the ideal partner for a man like Maxwell, beautiful, well-connected, and possessing a placid grace that served as a perfect counterpoint to his intense drive. Her father, a real estate magnate with a grip on half of Manhattan, beamed from the front row, seeing not a daughter, but the culmination of a lifelong ambition. The officiant, a retired judge with a sonorous voice, began the ceremony. His words about love, partnership, and union echoed in the vast space, but to some, they were just the elegant preamble to the real transaction. Hidden in the 10th row, seated discreetly near an exit, Dr. Aris Thorne felt the familiar constriction in her own chest. She shouldn't have come. Every instinct had screamed at her to decline the embossed, cream-colored invitation, but Maxwell had insisted, a personal, handwritten note accompanying the formal card. "It wouldn't feel right without you there. As a friend." The word was a sterile, clinical bandage over a wound that had never quite healed. Eris smoothed the fabric of her simple navy blue dress. It was elegant but understated, designed to make her invisible in a sea of haute couture. She was a ghost at this feast, a living embodiment of a chapter Maxwell had brutally torn out of his life story. Her world was one of sterile labs, grant proposals, and the quiet, relentless pursuit of neurological solutions at Johns Hopkins. It was a world away from this opulent theater. She watched Maxwell's posture, the slight stiffness in his shoulders, the way he subtly rolled his neck as if to relieve a pressure no one else could see. To everyone here, he was the picture of health and power. They saw the marathon runner, the man who graced the cover of Forbes, the billionaire who had everything. Eris saw the lie. She saw the man who used to wake up in a cold sweat, his hand pressed to his chest, terrified that the frantic, irregular drumming was a prelude to silence. She saw the man whose smile could falter for a split second when a camera flash was too bright, whose fingers would sometimes tremble so subtly that only someone who had held them for hours would ever notice. She remembered the nights spent not in lavish penthouses, but in quiet, darkened rooms, with her fingers on his wrist, counting the beats, her voice a low murmur talking him down from the precipice of panic. The officiant turned to Isabella. Her vows were flawless. delivered with a gentle, unwavering sincerity that charmed the room. She spoke of his strength, his vision, his brilliance. She loved the man the world saw. She had never been allowed to see the rest. Then it was Maxwell's turn. He faced Isabella, taking her hands in his. The room held its collective breath. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor started in his left hand. Aris saw it instantly. Her heart rate kicked up, a professional and personal alarm sounding in her mind. It was one of the early tells. "Isabella," he began, his voice a little strained. He cleared his throat. "From the moment I met you, you brought a light into my life." He paused. His gaze flickered, losing focus for just a second. The blue of his eyes seemed to cloud over. Isabella's perfect smile wavered with a hint of confusion. In the front row, her father's expression tightened. This was not part of the script. Maxwell's grip on Isabella's hands tightened, his knuckles turning white. I promised to..." His next breath was a sharp, audible gasp, as if the air had suddenly turned to glass in his lungs. His free hand flew to his chest, clutching at the silk of his waistcoat. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Was this part of some overly dramatic declaration? A moment of overwhelming emotion? Isabella's face, now etched with genuine concern, paled. Maxwell, are you all right?" He didn't answer. His eyes, wide with a silent, terrifying recognition, were no longer looking at his bride. They were scanning the crowd, a desperate, sweeping search. Aris felt the pull of that gaze as if it were a physical force. For a heart-stopping second, she was sure he'd found her, a silent plea across the abyss of their separate lives. Then his eyes rolled back in his head. His formidable frame, the one that had seemed so invincible just moments before, went slack. His knees buckled. With a sickening, heavy slump, Maxwell Blackwood collapsed onto the marble dais, pulling a stunned and screaming Isabella down with him. The room erupted. Chaos bloomed like a toxic flower. People surged to their feet, gasps turning to shouts of panic. Isabella's shrieks were sharp and piercing. Security guards rushed forward, trying to form a perimeter. Someone was shouting to call 911. "He's having a heart attack," a man yelled. "Give him space." But Aris Thorne was already moving. The ghost at the feast was no longer invisible. She was pushing her way through the frantic, paralyzed guests, her mind a cold, clear oasis of purpose in the desert of hysteria. The simple navy blue dress was now the uniform of the only person in a room of 1,000 people who knew that this was not a heart attack. It was the secret they had buried together, erupting from its grave at the worst possible moment. And only she knew how to fight it. The 10 yards between Aris's seat and the altar felt like a mile-long battlefield. She elbowed past a horrified socialite, ducked under the arm of a stockbroker fumbling with his phone, and ignored the chorus of confused shouts. Her focus was a laser beam fixed on Maxwell's crumpled form. "Let me through! I'm a doctor!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise with an authority that made people instinctively part. She reached the dais just as two of Maxwell's groomsmen were about to try and haul him to his feet. "Don't move him!" she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. The men froze, their faces a mixture of panic and relief. Isabella was on her knees, her perfect dress stained by the marble floor, her hands hovering uselessly over Maxwell's chest. Her face was a mask of terror and confusion. "What's happening? Somebody do something! His heart!" Aris knelt, her mind instantly shifting into the clinical, detached mode that made her one of the most promising neuro-researchers in her field. She pushed Isabella's hands gently but firmly aside. "I need space. Please." Her fingers went straight to Maxwell's carotid artery. The pulse was there, but it was terrifyingly erratic, a wild, galloping rhythm that she knew was a hallmark of a catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, or CPVT, episode. Adrenaline, the very thing that fueled his public ambition, was a poison in his blood. Extreme stress, like for instance, a multi-million-dollar wedding, was the trigger. "It's not a heart attack," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Her eyes scanned his face. His skin was pale and clammy, his breathing shallow. She tilted his head back to clear his airway. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" "They're on their way," a security guard confirmed. "Tell them the patient has a history of CPVT. They need to be prepared for ventricular fibrillation. He needs a beta blocker, not standard cardiac arrest protocol, Aris shouted, translating the complex medical reality into actionable instructions. The guard relayed the message, his voice filled with a new urgency. The guests stared, mouths agape. Who was this woman? This dark-haired stranger in a simple dress who had taken absolute control of the situation, speaking a language no one understood. Damian Blackwood, Maxwell's younger brother and best man, pushed his way to the front. For the first time in a very long time, Chloe felt a flicker not of fear, but of fascination. Who was this man who could orchestrate such beautiful, terrible chaos? This contract, she began, her voice steadier now. What are the terms? A small, almost imperceptible sign of relief registered in Alexander's eyes. He had won. The terms are simple. In public, we are a devoted couple. We attend functions, we support each other, we present a united front. In private, we can have separate lives, separate rooms. I will not ask anything of you that you are not willing to give. This is about protection and partnership, not romance. A partnership, she repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. Exactly. You will have access to my resources to pursue whatever you wish. An education, a business, a charity. Your life will be your own. Your only duty is to be my wife, in name and in public perception. She looked down at her hands, twisting a loose thread on her server's apron. She thought of her mother's dusty art supplies, of the dreams she had abandoned, an education, a life without fear. It was a seductive offer, a devil's bargain perhaps, but the devil was wearing a bespoke suit and offering her the keys to the kingdom. Okay, she whispered, the single word feeling like the biggest gamble of her life. He nodded slowly as if sealing the deal. Okay. There was no handshake, no signed document, just a quiet understanding that passed between them on a secluded patio, as the wreckage of another life settled just out of sight. He stood up and extended a hand to her. This time, when she took it, it felt different. It was no longer the hand of a stranger, but the hand of her partner, her husband. The thought was still dizzying. We can't stay here, he said. My mother will be regrouping. The press, despite my instructions, will be lurking. We leave now. Leave? To where? She asked, her mind still struggling to keep up. My apartment? I need to. I have clothes, my things. He gave her a look that was almost pitying. Chloe, you will never have to go back to that apartment unless you choose to. I have a penthouse in the city. It's secure. That will be our home. As for your things, send my assistant a list, and she will have anything you want delivered by morning. Anything you wish to retrieve personally can be arranged later. It was happening so fast. He was erasing her old life with a few quiet words. He led her to the gleaming black Audi, the door opening with a soft click. As she slid onto the buttery leather seat, still wearing his tuxedo jacket over her cheap uniform, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the tinted window. She looked like a child playing dress-up, a stray who had wandered into a palace. Alexander got in beside her, and the car pulled away with a silent, electric hum. As they drove down the long, winding driveway of Ohika Castle, leaving the scene of her past and future collision behind, Chloe clutched the locket through the fabric of her uniform. This wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales were simple, their endings happy and assured. This was complicated. It was a business deal wrapped in a scandal, a rescue mission disguised as a wedding proposal. She was a girl from Queens who was about to live in a penthouse, married to a billionaire she had met only hours before. She was terrified. She was overwhelmed. But as she glanced at the profile of the man beside her, his handsome face illuminated by the passing lights, his focus entirely on the road ahead, she felt something else, a tiny, fragile seed of hope. For the first time since her mother's death, she was not facing the world alone. Her future was no longer a straight, predictable line of struggle. It was a blank page, and Alexander Sterling had just handed her the pen. The story was theirs to write. So, what do you think happened next? Did Chloe find her footing in the glittering, treacherous world of the super-rich? Could a marriage born from strategy and honor ever find a chance at real love? Or were Chloe and Alexander destined to be partners in name only? The story is just beginning. This was the day everything changed. The moment a forgotten promise was kept in the most shocking way imaginable. If you were captivated by Chloe's story and want to find out what happens after they leave the castle, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible drama. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the underdog gets a fighting chance. What would you have done in Chloe's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Your support helps us create more stories like this one. A collective sigh of relief, fragile and shaky, went through the room. Maxwell's chest rose and fell with a breath of its own. His eyes remained closed, but he was alive. As the paramedics skillfully packaged him for transport, the fragile truce around the altar shattered. Damien Blackwood stepped directly in front of Aris, his face a thunderous mask. "You have a lot of explaining to do," he said, his voice low and menacing. Isabella, helped to her feet by her mother, pointed a trembling, pearl-tipped finger at Aris. Her beautiful face was twisted with fury and humiliation. "She's a liar! She did something to him!" Isabella cried, her voice cracking. "Maxwell is perfect. There's nothing wrong with him. Get her away from him. Security!" The family closed ranks, their shock curdling into suspicion, all of it directed at the one person who had just saved his life. Aris stood alone, the hum of the defibrillator still ringing in her ears, her hands aching, her heart a tangled mess of old grief and new terror. She had pulled him back from the brink, but in doing so, she had revealed the truth he'd fought so hard to conceal. And now, she was the enemy. The emergency room at Mission Hospital in Asheville was a world away from the Biltmore's opulence. Here, the air smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, and the lighting was a flat, unforgiving, fluorescent glare. Aris stood in a corner of the crowded waiting room, a solitary island, while the Blackwood and Montgomery clans formed a tense, whispering archipelago on the opposite side. They had all ridden in a fleet of black SUVs that followed the ambulance, a grim parody of a wedding procession. Isabella, wrapped in a cashmere throw someone had produced, was holding court, alternating between tearful pronouncements and angry, hissed conversations on her phone with, presumably, the wedding planner about how to manage the PR nightmare. Her parents stood by her, their faces grim masks of proprietary concern. Damien paced back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression a dark mixture of worry and something else, something that looked unnervingly like opportunity. No one spoke to Aris. They looked at her, their gazes filled with a potent cocktail of suspicion and resentment. She was the anomaly, the wrench in the gears of their perfectly orchestrated universe, the woman who knew the groom's secrets better than the bride, a cardiologist with tired eyes and the name doctor. Miller on his coat entered the waiting room. He looked from the Montgomery's expensive suits to Aris's simple dress and back again. "I'm looking for the doctor who was on site?" he asked. Aris stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Thorne. How is he?" Dr. Miller's gaze held a new respect. "Your pre-hospital diagnosis was spot on. The beta blocker almost certainly saved him from irreversible damage. You bought him the time he needed. He's stable, but we're keeping him sedated in the CV ICU. We need to run a full genetic panel and an electrophysiology study to be sure. But everything points to CPVT, just as you said. May I ask your relationship to the patient?" The question hung in the air. Before Aris could formulate an answer, Isabella cut in, her voice sharp. "She's no one, a wedding guest. How could she know something I didn't? I'm his fiancée." Dr. Miller looked uncomfortable. "Well, Mr. Blackwood has a medical file, an old one, from his university days at Stanford. It lists a doctor, Aris Thorne, as his primary medical advocate and emergency contact. It details the initial diagnosis." The silence that followed was profound. Isabella's face went from furious to utterly, devastatingly blank. Her mother let out a small, horrified gasp. Damien stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing on Aris. The truth was out, not just the medical diagnosis, but the history. A history written in old, forgotten paperwork. Aris felt a wave of dizziness. She hadn't been just a medical advocate. That was the sanitized term Maxwell had used to protect them both. She had been everything. The harsh hospital lights seemed to melt away, and for a moment, she was back in their cramped off-campus apartment at Stanford 7 years ago. He wasn't Maxwell Blackwood, the tech titan then. He was just Max, a brilliant, obsessive computer science grad student who lived on coffee and code. She was a driven pre-med student, fascinated by the elegant, complex machinery of the human body. They had met in a campus coffee shop, a cliché made real. He'd been arguing with a professor about algorithmic efficiency, and she'd been captivated by the fire in his eyes. Their first date was a marathon of conversation that lasted until dawn. He was mesmerized by her passion for medicine, for solving the unsolvable puzzles of the brain and heart. She was grounded by his unwavering belief that technology could solve the world's problems. The first episode happened 6 months in. They were hiking in the hills above Palo Alto, laughing and out of breath. He'd made a joke, then suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed, his face ashen. The terror of that moment was seared into her memory. That and the agonizing weeks of testing that followed, the condescending doctors who told him it was just anxiety, until one young, brilliant cardiologist finally gave it a name, CPVT, a ticking bomb in his DNA. That diagnosis changed everything. His ambition, which she had so admired, now seemed like a dangerous liability. His drive was fueled by adrenaline, the very chemical that could kill him. He wanted to build an empire. She just wanted him to live. So she made his condition her mission. She changed her specialty focus from general surgery to neurology and cardiology. She read every paper, consulted every expert. She built a life for them designed to manage his risk. Calm routines, a carefully monitored diet, biofeedback exercises. She was his shield, his guardian, his secret keeper. And he loved her for it. He loved her with a desperate, clinging intensity that sometimes frightened her. He called her his anchor. He said he couldn't live without her. Their love was forged in the crucible of his vulnerability, a fierce, private thing that the world could never understand. The breakup was as sudden and violent as one of his episodes. He had just secured the first round of major funding for what would become Innovate. They were celebrating. He was on top of the world, a tech visionary in the making. He took her to a fancy restaurant, a rare extravagance for them. She thought he was going to propose. Instead, he'd pushed his plate away and looked at her with eyes she didn't recognize. They were cold, distant, cruel. "This isn't working, Aris," he'd said, the words precise and devastating. "What? What are you talking about?" she'd stammered, her world tilting on its axis. "Us. I can't do this anymore. I need to focus on the company. You're a distraction. Your constant worrying, your hovering. It's smothering me. I need someone who sees me for what I can be, not for what's wrong with me." Every word was a calculated blow. He had taken her greatest act of love, her protection of him, and twisted it into a flaw. "That's not true, Max. You know that's not true." Tears were streaming down her face. "It is true," he'd insisted, his voice devoid of all the warmth she had known. "I don't love you anymore, Aris. It's that simple." It wasn't simple. It was a lie. A brutal, strategic lie she wouldn't understand until much later. He was cutting her loose. He believed his condition made him a damaged, unworthy partner for a woman with her brilliant future. He was building his empire, and he knew it was a high-wire act. He didn't want to pull her down with him if he fell. So he made her hate him because he knew it was the only way she would ever let him go. A hand on her arm jolted her back to the present. It was Dr. Miller. "Doctor? Thorne, are you all right?" Aris blinked, the ghosts of the past receding. "Yes, I'm fine." "Given your history with the patient," Dr. Miller said, his voice low and kind, "you might be the best person to help us understand his baseline. Would you mind coming with me?" It was both a professional courtesy and a lifeline. As she followed him through the double doors leading to the CVICU, she could feel the daggers of Isabella's stare on her back. She had saved Maxwell's life, but in the process, she had become the prime suspect in the implosion of his. The intensive care unit was a world of hushed urgency and rhythmic beeps. Maxwell lay in the bed, a still figure amidst a web of wires and tubes. His face, without its usual mask of command and control, looked younger, more vulnerable. It was the face she remembered from quiet mornings in their small apartment. the face he only ever showed to her. Dr. Miller briefed her on the care plan, and they spoke in the clipped, efficient language of their profession. But as she stood by his bedside, the clinical detachment began to fray. This wasn't just a patient. This was Max, the man whose heart she knew both literally and figuratively, the man who had shattered her own heart to save her from his. Outside in the waiting room, the fragile alliance of the two families was cracking under the strain. The collapse of the wedding was no longer just a medical emergency. It was a crisis of reputation and finance. Isabella, her initial shock hardening into a diamond-hard fury, was on the phone with her father. "He lied to me, Daddy. For 2 years he lied to my face. What else is he hiding? Is the company a sham? Is he?" Her voice was a venomous whisper. The concern was not for the man in the ICU bed, but for the integrity of her investment. The Montgomery name had been attached to a lie, and that was an unforgivable sin. Her mother, Eleanor Montgomery, was more pragmatic. She was huddled with her husband, her voice low. "We need to get our lawyers on the prenup. If he's medically unfit, there must be a clause. We need to protect Isabella's interests, and ours. The joint ventures are all contingent on this marriage." The Blackwood side was no better. Damien, after a series of tense calls, pulled his parents aside. His father, a gruff, old-money patriarch, looked bewildered. His mother was simply distraught. "This is a disaster," Damien said, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "The board is going to panic. The investors will flee. Our stock is going to tank the second the markets open. A CEO with a hidden life-threatening condition. We're cooked." "What are you suggesting, son?" his father asked, his voice weary. "I'm suggesting we get ahead of it," Damien said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "We have to invoke the company's succession protocol. The board can vote to appoint an interim CEO if the current one is incapacitated. I'm the COO. I'm the logical choice. I can stabilize the company, reassure the shareholders. It's what Max would want." It was, of course, the exact opposite of what Max would want. Maxwell's control over Innovate was absolute. He trusted no one, least of all his ambitious younger brother, whom he'd always kept on a short leash. The battle lines were being drawn, not around a man's hospital bed, but around his empire. The vultures were circling, smelling blood in the water. The only person thinking solely of Maxwell's well-being was Aris. She spent hours with the CVICU team, going over his old records, which she'd had digitized and stored in the cloud, providing insights that no one else could. She explained his specific reactions to different medications, his psychological triggers. She was, once again, his guardian. Late that evening, exhausted, she went to the hospital cafeteria to get a coffee. As she sat at a small, sterile table, Damien approached, his demeanor falsely solicitous. "Dr. Thorne," he began, sliding into the opposite chair. "I wanted to thank you. You saved my brother's life." Aris looked at him over the rim of her paper cup. She had known Damien for years and had never liked him. He had all of Maxwell's ambition, but none of his genius or his buried conscience. "I did what any doctor would do." "No," Damien said, leaning forward. "You did what you could do, because you knew. Which brings me to my question. Why did you and Max break up?" The question was a calculated intrusion, a probe for weakness. "That's none of your business," Aris said coldly. "I think it is," Damien pressed, a smirk playing on his lips. "You see, I have to protect my brother's legacy, his company, and it seems to me that a man with a secret like his would only push away someone he truly loved for one of two reasons: to protect her or because she was a threat." "So which is it, Aris? Were you a threat?" Aris stood up, her patience gone. "Your brother is lying up there fighting for his life, and you're down here playing boardroom games. You're pathetic." She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. "I know he funneled a huge amount of money into an anonymous grant at Johns Hopkins a few years ago. A grant for neurological research. Your research, I believe. He was still protecting you, even after he cut you loose. He loved you. He probably still does." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A love like that, a secret like that, it makes a man vulnerable. It makes his company vulnerable. And I can't allow that." Aris stared at him, her blood running cold. The grant. It had been anonymous. the blessing that had allowed her to establish her own lab. She had always suspected, had always hoped, but had never known for sure. Max had been watching over her, even from a distance. The thought was both heart-wrenching and terrifying. Damien wasn't just guessing, he was threatening. He was telling her that he knew everything, and he was willing to use it. She saw his plan with sickening clarity. He would paint Maxwell as unstable, not just medically, but emotionally. He would use Maxwell's love for her as proof of his poor judgment. He would use her as a weapon to destroy his own brother. Before she could respond, a nurse came rushing into the cafeteria. "Dr. Thorne, you need to come quick. It's Mr. Blackwood. He's awake, and he's asking for you." The news that Maxwell was awake and asking for Aris ripped through the waiting room like a shockwave. Isabella, who had been orchestrating a damage control campaign on her phone, froze mid-sentence. Her face, a carefully composed mask of a grieved fiancé, crumbled into raw disbelief. "He's asking for her?" she demanded, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I'm his fiancé. I'm the one he's supposed to marry. You tell him I'm on my way up." She made for the ICU doors, a woman on a mission to reclaim her territory. A stern-faced nurse blocked her path. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Blackwood is still in a delicate state. He was very specific. He will only see Dr. Thorne right now." The public humiliation was absolute. In front of her family, his family, and the hospital staff, Isabella Montgomery had been officially, undeniably replaced. Her father put a restraining hand on her arm, his expression thunderous. This was no longer just a lie of omission. It was a profound personal rejection. Aris felt 100 pairs of eyes on her as she walked past them, following the nurse. She didn't feel triumphant, only a deep, hollow ache of inevitability. The fortress of secrets Maxwell had built around himself had crumbled, and she was being summoned to the ruins. When she entered his room, he was propped up slightly, the sedation having worn off. The web of wires remained, but his eyes were open. They were clear, and they were fixed on her. The restless energy, the corporate armor, the public persona. It was all gone. All that was left was Max. Her Max. "Hey," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Hey," she whispered back, pulling a chair close to his bed. "You gave everyone quite a scare." "I bet I did," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "They told me what you did. You saved my life, Aris." "I was in the right place at the right time," she deflected, uncomfortable with the weight of his gratitude. "No," he insisted, his gaze intense. "You were the only place, the only right person." He looked around the room at the machines silently monitoring his every heartbeat. "I built a world on the idea that I could control everything, every variable, every outcome. Turns out, the one thing I can't control is my own body." He looked back at her, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. "I'm so sorry, Aris, for everything." Tears welled in her eyes, the tears she hadn't shed for 7 years. "Why, Max? Why did you do it? That day in the restaurant, you broke me." "To save you," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I was about to launch the company. The stress, the pressure, I knew it was going to be 1,000 times worse. I had a nightmare that I had an episode during a board meeting and died right there. And you were the only one who knew. And my enemies, and trust me, I was already making plenty, would have destroyed you for it. They would have called you a conspirator, ruined your career. So I made myself the villain. I figured if you hated me, you'd be safe from me." The truth, when it finally came, was both more selfless and more arrogant than she could have imagined. He hadn't done it just to protect her, but to protect his grand vision, his empire. He had made a calculated decision, a strategic sacrifice, and her heart had been acceptable collateral damage. Before she could process the painful confession, the door to the room burst open. Isabella stood there, her face a pale, furious canvas, flanked by her father and Damien. "I don't care what he said. I'm not being kept from my own fiancé," Isabella declared, marching toward the bed. Her eyes, however, weren't on Maxwell's face, but on the monitors, on the physical evidence of his imperfection. "Isabella," Maxwell started, his voice weak but firm. "Don't," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare say my name. You humiliated me. You stood there, ready to make a vow, a sacred promise, knowing you were a liar. You're flawed, damaged." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. It was the very word Maxwell had always feared, the one Aris had spent years protecting him from. He flinched as if struck. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. "After we were married, I was afraid you'd leave." "Leave?" Isabella let out a sharp, mirthless laugh. "Of course I would have left. My father doesn't merge his legacy with damaged goods. This whole thing, our entire relationship, it's been a fraud." The cruelty was breathtaking. The transaction was all it had ever been. Maxwell's face hardened, the vulnerability replaced by a cold, quiet fury. He looked from Isabella's disgusted face to Damien's watchful, predatory one. He saw it all in that moment. The plot, the ambition, the betrayal. "Get out," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old command. "Don't talk to me like that, Maxwell," Isabella retorted. "I'm not talking to you," he said, his eyes locking onto his brother. "I'm talking to him. Get out, Damien." Damien's smirk faltered. "Max, be reasonable. I'm just concerned for you, for the company." "I know exactly what you're concerned with," Maxwell said, his voice dangerously low. "I know about the calls you've been making to the board. I know you're trying to have me declared incapacitated. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? For me to fail." The accusation, direct and public, struck Damien like a physical blow. He paled, stammering, That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Maxwell countered. "Then I guess you won't mind that my first call will be to our corporate counsel to freeze any and all board actions until I'm back in the office, which will be sooner than you think." He then turned his gaze back to Isabella. The cold fury softened into a kind of weary finality. "You're right about one thing, Isabella. Our relationship was a fraud. But I wasn't the only one lying. You never loved me. You loved what I could give you. The wedding is off. The engagement is over. You can have the ring. Consider it severance pay." The final, brutal dismissal left Isabella speechless. Her father, recognizing a total loss, grabbed her arm and steered her out of the room. Damien, his face a mask of thwarted rage, hesitated for a moment, then followed, defeated. The room fell silent again. It was just Maxwell and Aris, surrounded by the beeping machines and the wreckage of his life. He looked exhausted, broken, but also free. The weight of his secrets, his empire, his fraudulent engagement had been lifted in the most violent way possible. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at Aris, his eyes clear of all lies. "So," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "where do we go from here?" A month later, the world looked different. The fallout from the wedding that wasn't had been spectacular, a supernova of scandal in the high society cosmos. The Montgomerys had issued a terse, frigid statement about irreconcilable differences before retreating behind the walls of their Hamptons estate to strategize their next merger. Damien Blackwood, stripped of his executive duties, had been exiled to a nebulous consulting role in the company's European division, a punishment designed to be both public and slow. The tabloids had feasted for weeks before moving on to the next billionaire's misfortune. For Maxwell, the quiet was a revelation. He wasn't in his sleek, glass-walled office overlooking Central Park, a place that now felt like a mausoleum to a man he no longer wanted to be. He wasn't in his sprawling penthouse, which he had already put on the market, its sterile opulence feeling more like a prison than a home. Instead, he was in Baltimore, standing in a rented sedan across the street from the East Baltimore Medical Science campus of Johns Hopkins. He watched the entrance, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his heart thumping with a nervous rhythm that, for the first time, felt like anticipation rather than a medical symptom. He was here not as a titan of industry, but as a supplicant. He finally got out of the car, feeling oddly conspicuous in his simple trousers and cashmere sweater. This was Aris's world, a world of purpose, of quiet, relentless work. As he walked through the automatic doors, the air changed. The cloying scent of money and power was replaced by the clean, sharp smell of ethanol and the hum of ventilation systems, a scent he associated with late-night studying with her, with hope and discovery. He found her lab at the end of a long, white corridor. The sign on the door was simple: Thorne Research Group, Neurocardiology. His chest tightened. Her name, her work, a world she had built entirely on her own, except for the one secret contribution he'd made. The door was ajar. He pushed it open softly and stood in the doorway, an intruder in her sacred space. The lab was organized chaos. Whiteboards were covered in complex equations and diagrams of cellular pathways. Centrifuges hummed softly. A young graduate student was meticulously pipetting liquid into a tray of vials. And in the center of it all was Aris. She stood before a holographic display, her back to him, wearing a familiar white lab coat over jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was twisted into a messy bun, a pen stuck through it. With one hand, she was manipulating a glowing, three-dimensional model of a ryanodine receptor protein, turning it, zooming in on the intricate folds where a genetic mutation could wreak havoc. She was so completely absorbed, so powerful in her focus, that he felt a wave of awe wash over him. This was the woman he had tried to forget, the woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He knocked gently on the doorframe, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the focused silence. She turned, startled, her eyes blinking to readjust from the hologram's light. When she saw him, her professional mask dissolved, replaced by a complex expression of surprise, warmth, and a hint of caution. A genuine, unguarded smile touched her lips. "Max, I didn't know you were coming today." "I was in the area," he lied, the falsehood feeling clumsy on his tongue. He had flown his private jet to Baltimore for the sole purpose of having this conversation. "I wanted to see it, where the magic happens." Her laugh was soft. "It's less magic and more tedious data analysis, punctuated by moments of sheer frustration, but we're making progress." She gestured to the glowing protein model. "We're getting closer to understanding why certain beta blockers work for some CPVT patients and not others. It's all in the binding affinity." He walked further into the lab, his gaze sweeping over the advanced equipment, much of which he now knew he had indirectly paid for. "The anonymous grant, the one that established this lab, that was you, wasn't it?" Aris's smile faded slightly. She nodded, her eyes searching his. "I always suspected it was too specific, too generous. It felt like you. I wanted you to have everything you needed," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was the only way I knew how to still be a part of your life, even if I couldn't be in it. It was the only way I could try to make up for what I'd taken from you." "You didn't take anything from me, Max," she said softly, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. He had taken years, had taken a part of her heart she'd never gotten back. "You gave me a chance to do the work that matters." This was his opening. He took a deep breath. "I want to give you more than a chance. I want to give you a guarantee." He pulled a sleek, leather-bound portfolio from under his arm. "Aris, I came here to officially dissolve the Blackwood Foundation." She stared at him, confused. "What? Why? It does so much good work." "It does," he agreed, "but its mission was too broad, too much about PR and legacy. My legacy. I want to do something real now." He opened the portfolio on a clear stretch of counter space. The documents inside were pristine, the culmination of a month of frantic work by his legal team. "I am re-endowing the entire fund, all of it, to create the Thorne Institute for Genetic Cardiology. It won't be a part of Johns Hopkins. It will be its own entity, partnered with them. You will be its director. The funding is permanent and absolute. You'll never have to write another grant proposal. You can hire anyone you want from anywhere in the world. Build any facility you can dream of. Your only mandate is to solve this, to find the answers, to fix what's broken, not just in me, but in every family that gets this devastating diagnosis." He was offering her the world, a kingdom of science built in her name. Aris was speechless. She sank onto a nearby lab stool, her hand going to her mouth. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined. It wasn't just funding. It was freedom. It was validation on a global scale. It was an apology written in billions of dollars. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock, of gratitude and of a sorrow for the 7 lost years that suddenly felt achingly real. "Max," she whispered, her voice choked. I can't, please," he said, his voice dropping to a raw, pleading whisper. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His were warm, steady. He wasn't the invincible titan anymore, nor the broken man in the hospital bed. He was just Max, looking at her with eyes that were finally completely honest. "Let me do this, Aris. Let me turn the ugliest thing in my life into something beautiful. Let me help you. This is the only legacy I care about now." She looked from his earnest face to the lab around her life's work. He was offering her the key to unlocking its fullest potential. Her tears overflowed, tracing paths down her cheeks. She nodded slowly, a single, decisive movement. "Okay, Max." I accept. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was, as if he'd been holding his breath for a month. He stood, though he didn't let go of her hands. An easy, profound silence settled between them. The beeps and hums of the lab were the only sounds. The ghosts of their past were still there, but they weren't screaming anymore. They were whispering, reminding them of the price they had paid to get to this moment. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," he began again, his voice hesitant, vulnerable. "I have so much work to do on myself, so much to unpack, but I was hoping maybe you'd let me take you to dinner." He rushed on before she could answer. "Not a fancy place, not a statement. I found a little pizza place over on Fleet Street. It's loud and the tables are sticky and it's always crowded." She remembered the place. They used to go to a similar one near Stanford when they were students, when a shared pizza was a celebratory feast. It was a memory from a simpler life, the one he had deliberately destroyed. He saw the flicker of memory in her eyes. "I know it's a pale imitation of the past," he said quietly, "but I want to build a new future, Aris. And I was hoping it could start somewhere honest, somewhere real, with you." He was offering her not a grand romance, but a simple, humble blueprint, a chance to start over from the first brick. She looked at his hands holding hers, then up at his face, the face of the man she had loved, the man who had broken her, and the man who was now offering to help her heal the world, and maybe, just maybe, themselves. Her smile was watery, but it was bright, clear, and full of a cautious, dazzling hope. "I'd like that very much," she said, "but you're buying. I make a scientist's salary, remember?" And so Maxwell Blackwood's meticulously constructed world didn't just collapse, it was reborn. He lost a fiancée, a brother's trust, and the perfect public image he'd fought so hard to maintain. But in the wreckage, he found something far more valuable: the truth. He found the courage to face his own vulnerability and a second chance with Aris, the woman who had never stopped seeing the man behind the myth. Their story reminds us that the strongest foundations aren't built on perfection and secrets, but on honesty, acceptance, and the courage to show our true selves, even when it's terrifying. What did you think of Maxwell's dramatic collapse and Aris's incredible choice? Was Isabella's reaction justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories filled with drama, twists, and real-life emotion, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next chapter.